Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders, viewable on M. Oppenheim TV and YouTube. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're chatting with leaders of museums across Cincinnati with our special guests, Rebekah Beaulieu, President and CEO of the Taft Museum of Art, Cameron Kitchin, Director of the Cincinnati Art Museum, and Elizabeth Pierce, President and CEO of the Cincinnati Museum Center. So thank you all for joining us. I'm so excited, right? Cincinnati, great city, great history, great museums. And so we're going to get right into it. And let's go around the table and describe the museum ecosystem that you inhabit every day, that you enliven every day for your audiences. And let's start off with you, Becky, at the Taft Museum of Art. Talk a little bit about the Taft Museum of Art, and then let's throw it over to Cameron, and then Elizabeth. We can talk about all the different museum organizations that are housed within the Cincinnati Museum Center. So, Becky, take it away.
Sure, my pleasure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me and my friends and neighbors here from Cincinnati, Mark. It's great to be able to talk about it a little bit. So the Taft Museum of Art is really kind of the historic house with a fine art collection in the city of Cincinnati. So we are an 1820 wood frame house that was turned over to the people of Cincinnati by the Taft family in 1927 and opened to the public in 1932. So we are just on the precipice of our centennial here at the Taft, which we are very much looking forward to. A couple interesting things about the Taft. We are a non-collecting institution, so we interpret the historical collection of Charles and Anna Sinton Taft. So that's very exciting for us because actually it's a fun experiment to find new ways to work with a historical collection that really is geared towards 19th and 20th century American and European art, Chinese ceramics, and miniatures. We do a lot of work with contemporary artists, though. We bring in special exhibitions and have in recent years started to change our exhibition model to really embed contemporary art in the historic spaces to really provoke some new dialogues, sometimes tangibly with the objects. So I am relatively new in my role. I have been here for just over 2 years. So I very much look forward to talking a little bit about Cincinnati and its dynamic versus some of the other areas that I've been in. So I will turn it over to Cameron.
And what's interesting is the interconnectedness, right? You have a non-collecting institution in a historic building, 100 years old. Cameron, Cincinnati Art Museum, famously a collecting institution with fabulous, fabulous works.
Right. We are so fortunate to be in Cincinnati, where we have an incredible ecosystem of cultural organizations, but particularly today talking about our visual arts organizations. We are a broad collecting institution, and we represent many of the eras of art history, global art history, in fact, 6,000 years of human history. And those 6,000 years range from ancient Cycladic figures all the way to contemporary objects that we just acquired literally yesterday at Miami Art Basel. So it is truly the broad spectrum of art history. With that comes a great opportunity and a responsibility that we serve all of Cincinnati. And so we think about Southern Ohio, the region that includes Indiana and Northern Kentucky as well. And we think about the deep and rich cultural heritage of this area as particular to art history. So we have an entire wing of the museum that is called the Cincinnati Wing that is about art made from this region, from artists and educators who have lived and worked in this region. It's unusual for an art museum of our size to commit so much of our institution to the art of its own place. So that's truly a joy and something that every school group who comes to the museum comes and visits. The museum itself has an interesting history, and the point for today is that it's a history that weaves together both with economic development and with art making in our city, which do tie together quite neatly in Cincinnati's history. The founding of the Art Museum was the idea that in the 19th century, there was a group of volunteers who came together, a group of women who said that we could form two arts institutions in tandem. at on this Eden Park site in Cincinnati. And the two arts institutions would be the Art Academy of Cincinnati, a degree-granting art college here, training the next generation of artists, as well as giving sort of jobs and economic opportunity to working artists in our community. And then pair that with a collecting historic art museum, the Cincinnati Art Museum. In fact, the two buildings were almost abutted against each other here on the hilltop in Eden Park. And so these two institutions still exist today because of the expansion of both institutions. The Art Academy of Cincinnati has relocated to a historic neighborhood over the Rhine, and now we occupy the entirety of this hilltop. We think of this hilltop as a hub for all of Cincinnati. We see yellow school buses, we see public transit, we see people coming in all modes of arrival to come to the art museum so that, yes, they can be with the art, but also so they can be with other people.
One of the things that I think is so interesting about how you have kept this sensibility evolving is that in the earlier history, the Cincinnati Art Museum looked toward Europe and Ohio. And now you're looking out at the world, and it would be so interesting to hear, and let's come back to this, it would be so interesting to hear how your collections have evolved over the last years under your leadership and that of your predecessor to basically embrace the world. Elizabeth, you have this collecting institution, or actually you're housing organizations with collections. Talk a little bit about the Cincinnati Museum Center, because this is such a complement. You are not like the Taft. You are not like the Cincinnati Art Museum. You have your own identity. And then within that identity are multiple identities as well.
Sure. Well, and we kind of fit together, and there are places where we connect and cross over. And then there are places where we kind of diverge to bring probably as many people in the community, as Cameron was saying, into the realm of museums, of using informal education experiences to really supplement and enhance their lives. So Cincinnati Museum Center is the creation of a merger with the Natural History Museum, which was formed in 1819, and the Cincinnati Historical Society, which was formed in 1831, which actually used to have space in Cameron's building at one point in time. So we are the Natural History and Science Museum, the Regional History Museum. The Children's Museum joined us in the early 1990s, and everything happens inside this spectacular building. And that's the corporate structure of Cincinnati Museum Center. We have a relationship with the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, which is on the banks of the Ohio River, as part of our corporate structure. And then as a tenant inside Union Terminal is the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanities Center, which is not part of our corporate structure, but a great complement, because the survivors of the camps, the Holocaust in Europe, came to Cincinnati through our train station. So it's a really important kind of connection that we can have here as we make history come to life in a number of ways. So we occupy this spectacular Art Deco building. We have about 6 million objects in our collection that date 450 million years ago to the local fossils of this area, all the way through to more modern day experiences. I got machine tools that seem to replicate overnight, and all sorts of other things. Also fine art and things that capture the history of the community, not art for art collecting, but collecting of it so it helps tell and round out the story of the natural landscape and the historic landscape of this region.
So let's talk a little bit about the audiences that you all serve, because this is a critical piece, right? You're not just collecting, Cameron, just to collect or preserve. You're collecting to inform, right? Elizabeth, you don't have a building just to house these objects, whether they're machine tools or fossils. And Becky, you're not just having this old historic building. It's really what you're doing is you're providing an experience. Each of you is providing an experience. So let's talk a little bit about. We'll go in reverse order. We'll start with Elizabeth and then go to Cameron. Elizabeth, as you're thinking about your audiences and you're working with your partners and you're thinking about serving Cincinnati, not only Cincinnati residents, but as Cameron suggested, right, this greater area, around Cincinnati, and then also visitors, people like me who will fly in and want to see the museum, will want to come to the Cincinnati Museum Center and the Cincinnati Art Museum and the Taft Museum of Art. How do you think about us as audience members? How do you think about our experience, and how do you engage us?
So I'm looking at all the different ways we can segment who our visitors are. And because we have range of content that is really cradle to senior citizen, I want to make sure that we're taking advantage of all of that to serve these different audiences. The Children's Museum is absolutely vital to the pipeline of all the other things that happen in Union Terminal, as well as at the Taft and at the Art Museum. And so we want to kind of create that sense of comfort and exploration and curiosity about the world. And so we want to keep feeding that. And every time these kids show up, they're kind of different people because they've evolved and they've grown. And we apply that notion to everybody else who's coming in. So we have lots of ways that we're trying to understand who needs what at what point in their lives and make that part of the experience. We've got, with the remake that we've done in the last several years of our content, we've tried to add a variability to the language in the content. So it's appealing to younger people and it's appealing to older people as well. And then we kind of keep building from there. But I'll turn it over to Cameron.
And Cameron, I'm looking here. You have fabulous exhibitions. You have an Ansel Adams exhibition. You've got your website is showing an exhibition on George Bellows. Talk a little bit about how you shape your experiences, your exhibition experiences, both the visiting exhibitions and then also your fabulous collection.
Right. Thank you for the question. We look deeply at both the new scholarship in art history that opens up new chapters of the art history textbook, and those exhibitions which will entertain, enlighten, and educate people in art that they know they want to see. So it's a blend of both, and that brings it together. And the beauty in all this is that when we think about sort of everyone's first visit to a museum, whether it's a science museum, a historic home, or an art museum, or any other type. When we think it's usually in one of two ways. You usually either come with a caregiver, a parent, a grandparent, or sometimes a chaperone or a babysitter, or you come through your school group. Those first visits to the art museum share something in that there is intergenerational learning occurring in both of those cases, whether it's to an educator, to a group of students, or whether it's to a caregiver, to a young museum visitor. Intergenerational learning is at the heart of everything we do. We formed the Rosenthal Education Center, the REC, which is a place for art making and art exploration that requires both the caregiver and the child to be in the space together. It's not a drop-off space. It's not a playground. It's a space in which both need to be together in that learning experience. We provide everything from baby tours, yes, baby tours, carrying a child to see the paintings and sculpture of the museum, all the way through Alzheimer's care.
So you start them young.
We start them as young as they can be, and we all the way through Alzheimer's care. So all stages of life, and everything that's in between. We truly believe that intergenerational learning is at the core of a museum experience. And what that says to me is that it's not just about audience, as we say. It's about the idea that those collections and the people together are what make the museum complete. Without the people in the space, the collection simply lay static. And so we want people to activate the museum to make it truly a public institution. And that idea of a visit with your grandmother, or a visit with your own child, or a visit with a caregiver or a teacher is all about the museum experience and making it something meaningful.
Becky, I love Cameron's observation, and Elizabeth made the same observation that people activate the space, right? I mean, isn't that part of it? How do you ensure that people get to experience the collections that you have to offer, and also the experience of the Taft Museum of Art?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you heard both Cameron and Elizabeth refer to intergeneration and lifelong learning. And I think that's something that we take really seriously at the Taft as well. I mean, something that I love to refer to is the fact that when our museum was first gifted to the city of Cincinnati in 1927, it was not gifted to the city government. It was gifted to the people of Cincinnati. The idea was, in its origination, to be a place that was the site of engagement with art. It was all about object and individual experience right from the get-go. So I think that we look at that as a charge from our founders. We look at that as fundamental to our mission and then to our everyday work. So for us, being in a historic site, one of the things that we battle a little bit more than Elizabeth and Cameron are preconceived notions that people have about the idea that you go once, you've seen it. I went in fifth grade with my field trip. I have been to the Taft. I get it.
Well, that's a big point, right? I mean, it's also true for Cameron's museum, right? There's this sense that if you go once, that's it, but it's not true because of your people, right? It's because
It's
of your
absolutely, it's not true. I mean, first of all, it's not true, I'd say, for all of us, because part of our job, part of our mandate is to be responsive to our communities, both our regional communities, national communities, to the changing needs of the visitor, and to create experiences that are welcoming and resonant. So, for example, for us, we've worked with doing things for people with sensory needs, making sure that we have the opportunity to provide experiences that are comfortable and welcoming for people of all abilities. That is something I personally was trained, and I think 85% of our staff was trained. So we look at kind of all abilities to really include both neurodivergence, invisible limitations or disabilities, as well as those that are visible. So I know that, my colleagues have more to offer, but I will say that has been something that has been really important for us in terms of reimagining the visitor experience. So it's creating something that is welcoming. Oftentimes, we have learned from those with physical ability that they really want to be able to be as independent as possible. The last thing they want is to have an experience at a museum that has to be facilitated physically by others. So when we talk about things like we're updating our lift, we're making a fully accessible lift upgrade over the next year, thanks to a big donor gift. And that's allowing us to adapt our space to better equip our team to work with those that are coming in with larger motorized wheelchairs that ADA regulations don't even account for. So the measurements of that outsize ADA compliance. So we're going above and beyond to make sure that those people can come in and be fully independent and not have to rely on anyone. So independence is a major one. And then I'll also say in terms of the visitor experience, especially for those who are dealing with invisible illnesses or conditions, again, that's not something that is our business, but it is our job to make sure that we're providing as much as we can. So that may be sensory issues, that may be, as you're talking about blindness or limited vision, we have made 3D models of a number of objects in our collection so people can actually feel the relief and feel the texture so that they have an ability to engage individually as well. And there are loads of other examples, but those are some of the ways in which we can make sure that the experience is accessible and inviting.
Elizabeth, Cameron, do you want to jump in on this particular topic? And then I'd like to talk a little bit more about some other audience segments. But Elizabeth, Cameron?
Yeah, we've done a number of collaborative conversations as we've been rebuilding these permanent galleries over the last several years with different groups around town. So, and the beauty of having Cincinnati Children's Hospital here and a number of other leading advocates for different abilities is that we're able to have those conversations directly in focus groups. And so Cincinnati Center for the Visually Impaired and Blind in particular came and helped us shape kind of what does the tactile experience need to be in the dinosaur hall. And so, we've got incredible reliefs of the dinosaurs, both with the skin and without the skin. And you can and everybody benefits from that, not just the people who have limited vision as well. So the kids love putting their hands all over it and feeling it. And of course, there's Braille in other places and audio enhancements to help people understand maybe what is happening around them. So just one example, but I think it's also speaks to the collaborative nature of Cincinnati, where a lot of organizations are willing to come together and provide feedback and help as long as you're inviting them into that conversation.
Right. I think you're right on, and I think a key point to make in this citywide sort of ethos that accessibility is at the core of what we do, and multiple definitions of accessibility, but beginning with physical accessibility. We talked about how important it is for people to be in a space together. People who may not have other social interaction, but around the museum they can find each other in this public space. So it's important for every individual of every difference in ability, of every definition, to be able to be in the space on equal terms. So for me, when we began on this journey with full accessibility of a 19th century building over 300,000 square feet with a lot of the quirks and the challenges that come therein, I remember a day at the museum when we fully accomplished accessibility, not through an alternative door or rear door of the museum, but through the same front door which all visitors arrive to. And I remember seeing that first day, a school bus pull up, and a child who was being educated together with all students, arriving with her class in a chair. She had limb differences and was in the chair for her life, and arriving alongside her classmates, pulling into the front door of the museum rather than being directed out to another entrance to the museum. And I have to tell you, it was an emotional moment for me as a museum professional to finally see this accomplishment, that child now knows that she is not treated as lesser or different in her experience of visiting the museum. Becky mentioned about and the around the idea of 3D modeling, the Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired, really important, particularly when we think about low vision individuals. And yes, those can be elder care, but they also can be at any stage of life. All three of our institutions have done tremendous work in doing 3D modeling of objects in the collection that then can be recreated, printed again, so that those of low vision can actually have a tactile experience with an object that otherwise couldn't be touched. It's a different way of visiting the museum, providing quiet spaces and quiet rooms or early hours for autism, for visitors who live with autism or caregivers is really important. Providing all of the accessibility needs for any individual who wants to visit the museum, but wants to visit the museum not on different terms, but on the same terms as all others. It's at the core of what we do. I think Becky had mentioned this idea of the museum being a gift to the community, and exactly as the Taft story was, a very sort of heartwarming moment in our museum's history is at the day of dedication for the Cincinnati Art Museum, which was in May of 1886. The day of dedication, the mayor of Cincinnati walked to the lectern and he said that this museum is a gift of the people for the people. A gift of the people for the people. And I think all three of our institutions live that today.
I want to express my personal admiration for the terms in which you are describing, the terms with which you are describing your ideas and how the community has come together around difference. We all have difference, and there are different types of differences. As Becky said, some of them are apparent through our visual senses. We can actually see the difference, but there are many differences that are unseen. They can be differences in capabilities or how one processes information, but they can also be differences in income. They can be differences in background. They can be differences in age. They can be differences in different capabilities. And what you're basically doing is you're saying, if we're going to be museums for all people of Cincinnati, all visitors to Cincinnati, we have to actually think beyond our own circumstance and gather in the knowledge. Elizabeth, you were talking about how people came together and helped you to shape your experience and your physical accessibility approaches and your accessibility of your collections. This is just a very admirable way of thinking, and we should all be promulgating these ideas out into the field. I'm just so grateful that you've taken the moment to express these here. I'd like to talk a little bit about the impact of museums on cities and on states, and on how it makes these environments so much better to have these museums there. Cameron, we're going to start with you since it's your turn. Could you talk a little bit about the economic impact? And I'm
Sure.
talking about dollars and cents. I'm not talking about the wonders of art. I'm talking about the actual institutional impact of having this museum through this long history that you've had on Cincinnati as a place to live and work and play, and how that is so key to the nature of what Cincinnati is.
Right. Thank you for that. In many cities, you would hear the storyline, the very true storyline about the sort of economic power of cultural institutions to be able to make a place and to be able to make it a great place to live, as well as to draw tourism to the community. But I want to take a little bit different angle on your question, which is that the founding of our institution in particular came with the idea that art makers themselves can be economic agents. That in fact, in the 19th century, some of Cincinnati's most thriving industries were what today we would think of as the industrial arts, whether it's clockmaking or furniture making or silver making. And these or pottery, and these were commercial enterprises in the city. So the founding of our institution came with an economic mission, which was we would develop art making as a creative industry in our city, which has happened. And today, when we think of creative industries, we think of marketing and website development and technology, but we also think about artists in our community. And I think that for us, we have a call to action to return to the notion when we lose our way that art making and artists are part of what make a city great. Yes, visiting an art museum, but also investing in the people who make art today.
And design, right? It's when you talk about art, you're not creating barriers between a painting or a sculpture or decorative arts, what are called decorative arts, furniture making, design, and that connects directly, Elizabeth, into industrial design, right? Of your machines that you are exhibiting and the sciences that you are showing. There is a real sense of design in the sciences or in play, right? Or even in what we wear.
Absolutely. And I was just pulling up the numbers from the ArtsWave Economic Impact Report because I think they're pretty spectacular. So in 2022, the economic impact of the Cincinnati arts community, and that includes performing arts as well, is close to $500 million in 1 year. So, and to Cameron's point, workforce development in this community needs to be developed and nurtured by all of us. And I am always on my soapbox about how I think workforce development starts in the Children's Museum, where there is that sense of curiosity and that sense of hands-on playing and then beginning to build things out. I'm making a note that we're going to have an economic history tour that goes from the Taft to the Art Museum to Cincinnati Museum Center, so we can really help people illustrate that. Because to Cameron's point, I have things in the History Museum that are presented as artifacts of the manufacturing history of the community, and he has similar things, and Becky has similar things in their museums as examples of artistic tradition in the community. And
what
they
a
all
fabulous
have
idea.
economic benefit. It's great. Yeah.
What a fabulous idea. It really is something. I applaud.
I can't help myself when we get together.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fabulous idea. This idea of taking themes where people can travel from museum, and there's a cross-fertilization benefit where you can have audiences of one museum be exposed to other museums. What do you think, Becky?
Well, that is something that I think Cincinnati has an edge on virtually every other city in the United States. Not only do we have these powerhouse institutions that I think dovetail each other in terms of our collections, in terms of our buildings, in terms of our histories, and our relationship to the city and to the changing populations of the city. But I think in addition to kind of the structures themselves, there is an unbelievably collaborative dynamic. And that is something that does not exist, at least in the other cities like Chicago, DC, Milwaukee, Boston, New York, that I have worked in, where there is such a rich kind of fabric of all of these arts institutions that compound that. So we're not just talking about the value of life because there is an art museum. We're talking about not just the value of life because there are things to do in a downtown area and it's not tumbleweeds. We're talking about the fact that you can have full, robust days of experiencing arts in Cincinnati, and you're never going to hit it all. There's always emerging artists. There's always new things that are happening. This is an incredible laboratory of a city for artistic creation and, the creative impulse. And then you have some of these institutions that are trying not to bring that in and say, we want a bigger piece of the pie, but rather to say, how do I get in the sandbox and play with everybody else? How do I create a space in which people want to come in and we can be a part of it? So it's very experimental. It's very innovative. We receive a lot of support. I think part of being a citizen of Cincinnati, whether you're a cultural, corporate, or private citizen, is support for the arts. This is not something that we have to battle. As I've said, other places I've worked, you're starting from scratch, kind of like, here's the benefit of a museum. Here you're entering a conversation that's already in progress, and you are contributing to it.
Since we're coming to the end of our time here, let's go around the table one more time and let's talk a little bit about what you would love to see happen over the next couple of years of your tenures, any initiatives that you have, and let's talk about how we can galvanize resources to make those things happen. Cameron, you want to kick us off, and we're going to go around to Becky, and then we'll end up with Elizabeth.
Sure, I'm happy to. So we're underway with so many various things at the at any given time. We have 3 major special exhibitions happening in addition to collections development throughout the museum. But I do think it's important to also talk about the technical side of art historical practice, which is to say, advancing the next generation of leadership in our field through academic fellowships, through conservation science that happens here at the museum, laboratories. And Elizabeth, we have X-ray machines here. You'll be thrilled by that.
Awesome.
To be able to sort of think what that next generation looks like. Now, when we think about that next generation, it needs to be a broader and more inclusive look at the entirety of who can practice art history, who in fact gets to be the author in authority. And when we think about who those authors are, we need to think about lived experience, as well as think about academic training, and blend those together in a new model of thinking about who is the voice within those pages of the textbooks we're going to read in the future. So that means thinking about people of all walks of life in our city to be able to add and to augment, and listening to the voices of the visitors who come through the museum, who have knowledge to offer as well in our practice. We move, I think quite in a quite agile way, from being an institution that speaks to an institution that listens and has conversation. And I look forward to it.
What a fabulous, fabulous set of points. Becky, what are your priorities over the next couple of years, and how do we make those priorities happen?
I love that. Well, I think something that's been fun is, since I've only been here for a couple years, a lot of my first kind of experiences in the city, which have all been fabulous, to be honest, was about figuring out kind of who we could collaborate with, where there are opportunities to grow the profile of the Taft Museum. We're the historic house that is behind a big iron gate. So how are we changing the perception of the Taft? And as I like to say, reintroducing ourselves to the city. So we've already started some of that, but we have some exciting projects, including in 2027, mounting a major exhibition of the work of Robert S. Duncanson, who was the first professionally trained, or recognized as the first professionally trained Black painter in America. In the mid-19th century, we have a suite of murals here in situ at the museum that were painted on site. They're absolutely amazing. So we're hoping to start this year with a convening of new scholarship that has been in the works on Duncanson, then move into exhibition prep, and hopefully be able to do major conservation of our murals and result in extended study of his work. We've also been excited to activate our local kind of neighborhood here in Cincinnati. We're in the Lytle Park neighborhood. The park just went through a major kind of rejuvenation with the Parks Department. That opened earlier this year. So we're partnering with them and with local businesses on activating that park as an art space, and hopefully having some installations that are on the front lawn of the Taft and continuing into the public space to really encourage dialogue, public and private. And then another thing we have coming up in 2025 that I'm working with some folks on Elizabeth's team on is we are going to be hosting the American Association for State and Local History Conference, which is a national conference for those who work in the public history field. And we're thrilled to be bringing approximately 1,000 of our peers across the country here to really show off everything that is great about Cincinnati.
Superb, a superb summary, Elizabeth.
It's going to be
Now,
fabulous.
we're all waiting with bated breath because Cameron was fabulous, Becky was fabulous. What fabulous things are in store at the Cincinnati Museum Center?
Well, we have a lot of interesting things happening here. Particularly one of my newest, shiniest toys that I like to play with is our Create Culinary Studio, featuring the Kroger Food Lab. And so this is the notion that we can teach science and history through food, through cooking, through hands-on demonstrations, through explorations of history, one bite at a time, if you will. We've got, cocktail lessons coming up as well. So it covers the gamut in terms of what we can do. We do summer camps with it. We do homeschool chef programs for young students, and we do adult programming. So that's an initiative that's still getting its legs. We're part of the Teaching Kitchen Collaborative, which is a group across the country that's trying to embed food as medicine in a number of places. So there's a lot more to come with the Create Culinary Studio. And that is going to drive in different types of visitors and different age ranges of visitors at different parts of the day, which is fundamental to financial sustainability. So I think one of the key things that we're focused on as we move forward, we've redone Union Terminal with a huge restoration. We've done all this work on the permanent galleries through private philanthropy. And that is all to be a regular, financially sustainable organization going forward. So building the endowment more and all of that will carry forward with it. And the last initiative that we're working on is a brand new collections and research facility where we will house the treasures of our community. We have a building, but we have outgrown that facility and we need to move into a bigger space. And so that comes with all sorts of opportunities and community collaborations as well.
I love this sort of combination of infrastructure, financial stability, and also the various points that you all have made. Elizabeth, this whole idea of culinary, right? The culinary arts, it's actually called an art,
yep.
Right? And the point that you made, Cameron, about lived experiences, which then get expressed through culinary experiences. The point that you made, Becky, about the connection between your museum and what's going on in the Rec and Parks Department and the gardens and those horticultural experiences. This is it's just the thing that makes a city wonderful, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
So thank you all for making Cincinnati so wonderful. Rebekah, Beaulieu, President and CEO of Taft Museum of Art, Cameron Kitchin, the Director of the Cincinnati Art Museum, and Elizabeth Pierce, President and CEO of the Cincinnati Museum Center. It has just been wonderful for me personally to learn from you, to sit at your feet and drink of your wisdom. Please thank your people, your donors, your visitors, your volunteers. It is just such a benefit to not only Cincinnati, but to the United States and the world, the work that you're doing. And thank you so much for your insights.
Thanks for having us.